For many of us, we probably first interacted with the term digital economy back in 1995 through Don Tapscott's bestseller, The Digital Economy, Promise and Peril in the Age of Network Intelligence. This was essentially one of the first books which described how the internet would disrupt the way within which we do business. But more than disrupting business, it certainly changed the way within how we live our lives, our interactions with products, our interactions with people. But more than that, ladies and gentlemen, the digital economy is not just about connectivity. It's about ensuring that families and communities are able to receive adequate primary health care. It's about more than just posts on social media. It's about ensuring that there's effective and adequate communication and access to educational facilities and actually tracking the progress that humans make within their lives. Not only that, but it's more than just cute devices which have the latest technological advancements. It's about ensuring that we allow citizens to be active game changers within their communities, participating in their economies by flourishing as well as thriving within the world of entrepreneurship. Ladies and gentlemen, with that said, my name is Gugulethu Mfuphi from CNBC Africa, and I have the pleasure of being your moderator for today. We will delve into a conversation regarding the digital economy in Africa and peeling back at the various layers which are required in order to ensure that collaborative efforts are in place and that progress and sustainability is maintained within encouraging and developing a sustainable digital economy. Providing the digital infrastructure, ensuring that we enable the skills, developing the necessary platforms, enabling digital financial inclusion, and most importantly, supporting sustainable digital and tech entrepreneurship. To give you an overview of how the event will run today, it will certainly be an invigorating conversation over the next hour and a half with a fireside conversation with leaders within South Africa and Africa's business landscape from across the continent who will be giving us some insight into the digital economy and some of the practicalities that we need to bear in mind. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll also have a follow-up panel discussion to that, which will be 1 hour long, which calls for your interaction and participation. With that said, allow our speakers to take to the stage and prepare the ground for the conversation that we look to host. Dr. Jim Yong Kim, who's the president of the World Bank Group, followed by Jeff Weiner, the CEO of LinkedIn, and Tony Elumelu, founder of the Tony Elumelu Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, please warmly welcome them on stage as Dr. Kim leads this conversation.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to see such a great crowd. We're so fortunate to have Jeff and Tony with us today. And so let's jump right in. Jeff, you know, I've been a big fan of LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm a LinkedIn influencer.
Top 50. wait, top 50 LinkedIn influencer, 1.9 million followers.
1.9 million. Pretty good, right? You know, I was just at a press conference, the opening press conference, and literally half the questions were about technology, the role of technology in developing countries. And so how do you see big trends in digital economy? I know that you've really focused on the future of work, which is really important for us. So what's your sense of how technology might have an impact in developing countries? And also, what's the role of LinkedIn? I know you guys are in so many different countries now. What's your sense? You know, I was asked questions like, you know, is technology going to destroy developing countries, or is technology going to help developing countries leapfrog into the next generation?
Yeah, and there's probably a little bit of both as the answer. Certain roles, certain jobs are certainly going to evolve and change. There are workers who are going to be displaced. There are workers who are going to need to retrain and reskill within their existing companies. There are folks that are going to have to look for work elsewhere as those jobs no longer exist. You know, for us, and Jim and I were just talking about this previously, there's a lot of unanswered questions. Yeah. And I think anyone who would tell you that they have all the answers needs to be, I think, interpreted through a somewhat skeptical lens, because there's just so much change happening right now, and the pace of change continues to accelerate. What we do have is data that we didn't have previously, and we're in a position now for the first time, not just LinkedIn, but other platforms, other companies, governments around the world are in a position where they can start to get ahead of these trends in a way that just wasn't possible previously. So at LinkedIn, our vision is to create economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. There's over 3 billion people in the global workforce. And the way in which we believe we can make this happen starts with what we call the economic graph. And the economic graph is a mechanism through which we can digitally map the global economy across 6 different pillars. We'd like there to ultimately be a profile on LinkedIn for every member of the global workforce, those 3 billion people I cited earlier. We'd like there to be a profile for every company that exists in the world, as many as 60 million plus companies when you include small and medium-sized businesses. We'd like there to be a digital representation of every job that is accessible, that is open. There's as many as 20 million of those jobs digitally accessible today. We want there to be a digital representation for every skill required to obtain those jobs, and ultimately all the coursework necessary to acquire those jobs offered by those companies. A digital representation for every higher educational organization and vocational training facility in the world that offers those skills. And then lastly, a mechanism similar to what we were just describing with our influencer here, a publishing platform that enables every individual company and university to share their professionally relevant information and knowledge. And as a result of putting this economic graph together, we can actually look for the flow of intellectual capital, working capital, human capital, and where it's best leveraged. And we can start to do things like pick a locality anywhere in the world, understand the fastest growing jobs within that locality, the skills necessary to prepare for those available jobs, the aggregate skills of the workforce within that locality. We can measure the gap, and we can start to get ahead of those trends so that we're providing governments and higher educational organizations, vocational training facilities, junior colleges, the data they need to create just-in-time curriculum, to train their workforce for the jobs that are and will be, and not just the jobs that once were.
Yeah. So, Tony, you've been so successful as a businessman yourself, but then you've put so much energy into creating environments where entrepreneurs from Africa can flourish. And you've been such a champion for young African entrepreneurs. What do you see as the barriers for African entrepreneurs, and how do you prepare these young people to create the businesses, but also understand what Jeff just talked about? You know, that you can't just create a business unless there's a need for it out there, right? How do you approach the work that you're doing in the foundation?
So first, Jim, I want to say congratulations to you and your team for putting this together. Next time this will be to hold on the continent of Africa, because we need this. The truth is the population of Africa presents an interesting, depending on how you see it, challenge or opportunities. We have 60% of our population under the age of 30. We have 55% of our economy is in the informal sector. So these present quite interesting opportunities for digital economy we're talking about. In my interaction with young Africans, I see people who are quite determined, energetic, hungry to succeed and make a difference, who are extremely intelligent, but the environment at times makes it difficult for them to succeed. We can't talk of digital economy in Africa without fixing critical infrastructure, like digital connectivity issue. It's a major issue in Africa, and we can't fix it if we don't have reliable access to electricity. So if we want to truly address the issue of digital economy in Africa, these challenges have to be fixed. Second is the issue of government policies and regulation. We need government to understand that if we prioritize the young ones, if we fix the operating environment and enable them to optimize their natural intellect, they will do well, and they will help us all to solve the problems that we seek to address. So regulation is major. Intellectual property, very, very important if we must fix this issue on the continent. Incentivizing investors and even entrepreneurs, eliminating documentation issues. These are factors that will help us address digital issues. And again, for the entrepreneurs in Africa, I would say let's not just look at the challenges, let's look at the opportunities. And there are a lot of opportunities on the continent in this space. We need to just see how we can take advantage of the opportunities in spite of the challenges that we face every day. There are a lot of opportunities. Investors would like to invest. I know at times you have conversations and people are asking, what do you want to do to make investors come in? Let's fix policy issues, let's fix regulatory issues, and investors will come to Africa. And as these investors come to Africa, we'll help address the issue of youth unemployment, we'll help address the issue of poverty, we'll help involve our women in the economic activities of the continent. So at the Tony Elumelu Foundation, I want to speak from experience. This is the 4th year of the entrepreneurship program that we put in place. And my experience is, first, many young Africans want to be in this space. We have the highest in terms of percentage of representation and interest is education, about 30%. Next is ICT. And these young entrepreneurs want to succeed. They need, as I said before, addressing some of these issues that they come from. And also, we need to put in place tech hubs for them. If we have tech hubs, they will do a lot more in helping us to galvanize this space. The Tony Elumelu Foundation is happy to support these young Africans, but we need more collaboration by all, government creating the right environment, development partners continue to support, and those who are endowed to support them in a manner that helps to actually create the entrepreneurs in this space that will help us develop the continent.
Jeff, you guys are now, LinkedIn makes perfect sense to me in the United States or in advanced economies, but you guys are everywhere.
Yeah.
What's been your experience in developing countries?
We're starting to see faster and faster growth there. And it's exactly to your point, it's increasingly a global phenomenon. We're up to north of 540 million members. I mentioned that total addressable number earlier of north of 3 billion, so still a long way to go. And we've been making additions to the platform in terms of our product offering that I think are going to accelerate even further our rate of growth in developing economies. The acquisition of Lynda and our moving into the learning and development space, interestingly enough, is one of the areas we're most excited about in Africa. We've seen learning and development customers in South Africa, for example, one cellular company, where we're seeing 3 times the level of traditional activation, 5 times the level of engagement. And what you realize is in a developing market, learning and development is not a nice to have, it's a must have for all the reasons that you were just talking about. So we're going to continue to understand where those unmet needs are, we're going to continue to invest, but this idea that being able to leverage your network, being able to leverage your relationships to open doors and provide access to opportunities, whether those are jobs or prospects or starting companies, that's a universal dynamic. Mm-hmm. And so there's going to increasingly be demand for this kind of platform.
Yeah. Tony, so as what we see is there's things that just happen no matter what. I mean, the young people are innovative. They find ways to do things. And the list of essentials that you just wrote, connectivity, electricity, regulation, kind of an intellectual, good regime for intellectual property, right? But let me put you on the spot a little bit. Okay. So many African leaders, though, want different kinds of things, right? They want standard gauge rail instead of meter gauge rail. They want to build big industrial parks. And Jeff and I were just talking about it. There's not a lot of evidence that suggests that, let's say, the Korean path to economic development is going to be open to lots of African countries. It's probably not going to go agriculture, light manufacturing, heavy industry, which is why I think your work is so important, because you're saying we can build this economy on a different basis. So why is it that so often African government leaders want one thing, and the people you support are going in a different direction? And what would you say to them, the African leaders? Help me out here.
First is, I have always argued that in the 21st century, with the advancement in information technology and for the global system, there's a lot more, or there's no one set approach to development. You can actually leapfrog what has happened in other parts of the world. But what is critical for development is that first, there must be a purpose to develop. There must be a purpose to move people out of poverty. There must be a purpose to drive an inclusive development on the continent. And there must be a purpose to do all of this on the platform of transparency. When there's overall alignment along these areas, you see that development will come. For Africa, we do have demographic dividend in our people. I speak authoritatively as someone who has supported most of these young Africans, especially in the area of entrepreneurship. I see enthusiasm, I see intellect, I see determination to succeed, I see willingness to do so, I see people who are disciplined, you give them $5,000, and indeed, they apply this for the purpose. So why don't we harness all of these people? Why don't we have government, instead of looking at different models, just okay, we have this, let's create the right environment that will enable these people to succeed. Mark Zuckerberg was in Nigeria not long ago. One of the places he visited was a small tech hub we have in the country. And if we didn't have that, probably the kind of investment he's made or is making might not have come up. So let's begin to prioritize these young people who have great ideas. Let's look at it differently. And I think that is why I commend you and your group for even creating this kind of platform, plugging in African policymakers into this, those who are here and those who are outside here listening to this conversation. In the 21st century, with the abundance of resources we have on the continent and the type of demographic dividend of population we have, we should model our own growth path. And our own growth path should be based on our people. Our people, if we prioritize our people, we will see massive development on the continent. So I want to move away a bit from the paradigm. But go on if you want to.
No. I was just saying, in many ways, we feel that we haven't done enough. We haven't done enough with our clients in saying, oh my goodness, there's all these transformations happening out there, and looking to us to just do the things we've always done, building roads. And, the story I tell all the time is 25, 30 years ago, we had a debate inside the World Bank Group about whether or not we should build telephone poles in India. Right? Because the idea was that for India to advance, they need a telephone service, and of course that's all done with poles and cables. And so luckily we decided against building telephone poles. But then I asked my own team all the time, are we doing the equivalent of building telephone poles in India now, in Africa? Well, are we ahead of the curve enough? And so I sometimes hear African leaders saying to me that they want to follow the path of Korea. And it's difficult for me to say, well, I don't know if that path is still available.
That's what I'm saying. At the time we were thinking of telephone booths in India, technology has not advanced to where it is today.
Yeah.
Today, there's no point of talking about telephone booth again. Everyone has telephone booth in this.
But what's the telephone pole of today?
Yeah, that's what I've said. The telephone booth today that we need to fix in Africa is our people, our young ones. The 60% of African population who are under the age of 30, who want to do well, who can actually come up with creativity, innovation that might help to pull Africa out of where it is today. We need to prioritize them. We need to give them support. We need to remove those stifling policies, man-made stifling policies that are stopping them, that holding them back. If we unleash that, if we remove that, we unleash enormous resources to the world.
But we also have to invest more in their education, right? And so Jeff, let me ask you. So, the representatives have told me that, look, my oldest son is going to university next year. But I've heard from a lot of people that, well, actually university is going to be obsolete in a few years, and people will learn everything online. And so what's your sense of that? So I worry a lot. We just published a World Development Report on education, in which we showed that a year of education is not the same in every part of the world. And we showed that a year of education in Singapore is very high quality. But then a similar year of education in Yemen or Malawi or in several East African countries is equivalent to just about half of a year of education in Singapore. So how are your systems going to work, for example, in helping some of Tony's young entrepreneurs get the skills they need? Do you think that's possible to do that online?
I do. I don't think it's going to come at the exclusion of universities. I don't think they're going away anytime soon. And I don't think it's a debate of mutually exclusionary terms, this idea that there's degrees and skills. I think there's room for both. I think as a society we have a tendency, certainly here in the United States, to overweight degrees at the exclusion of skills. And all hirers and companies, especially where you see such a shortage of talent, not just here, but all over the world, need to broaden their aperture to recognize that there's incredible talent out there, exactly the kind of talent you were describing earlier, that hasn't had access to a 4-year university or degree. And by virtue of platforms like LinkedIn and other learning and development platforms, and this transition that a number of traditional university offerings are going through, where they're making their coursework accessible and available to much broader audiences around the world, I do think that's going to change, and I think it's going to change in a material way. The next step is not just making that coursework available, it's what happens as a result of getting certified.
Yeah.
And again, there has to be a fundamental shift in the emphasis and the weighting that's been placed historically on people graduating from the same kinds of places. And once companies start to experience success, hiring someone that did become certified online in a remote location, and they hire them and they see the amount of value that that person's capable of adding, the dam's going to break, and you're going to see very fundamental shifts in this, because there increasingly is a shortage of the kind of talent companies need to continue to grow. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, you were asking about telephone poles and what would be the analog. What's the equivalent of investing in technology that becomes antiquated, and wanting to skip that process? Interestingly enough, I think part of it is based on curriculum. And I think it's important that we're not just investing, there's a lot of focus right now on ensuring that everyone can code. And the work of organizations like code.org that ensures that coding is taught in all classrooms is fantastic. But Jim, we're also in a position where we can do much more to train people on just foundational digital fluency skills. How to operate a word processor, a spreadsheet. These are skills that are going to be increasingly important, because having that as a foundation makes it that much easier for people to reskill by virtue of all the new technologies that are being introduced. And if you don't have that foundation in place, it becomes that much harder to learn multiple skills at once.
So let me ask both of you, and again, I'm asking for your help on this one, because I'll go to countries, and usually I do an event with university students, and I've been an educator all my life. But what they ask me is, what should I study, and what kind of skills should I have? What are the things that if I learn, I know they'll be valuable someday? What would you say to these young people, Tony?
Okay, so let's look at what we do through the Tony Edmillion Foundation and use that hopefully as a way, an approach to answer the question. So when every year we try to support 1,000 young African entrepreneurs, and we say to them, it's sector agnostic. It's not important whether you're educated or not. It's also
you said sector agnostic.
Yeah, sector agnostic.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter the sector you're in, we want to follow your passion. We want you, because ideas that come from your passion to a large extent succeed. So set aside the issue of education, tell them what you studied in school, and tell them what you're passionate about. And they come up, we've seen medical doctors come up express interest in fashion. We've seen computer
Obviously,
science.
I'm not one of those medical doctors.
We've seen computer scientists express interest in ICT.
Yeah.
Okay, and so what we are seeing, and I think that to some extent addresses the new way forward, is more of skill development, it's more of passion, it's more of what you instinctively can wake up at night want to do, and what you do without feeling that you're inconveniencing yourself or being stressed to do it. I think that is important. Any and every area can lead to success. I imagine that today's digital revolution, when it started many decades back, people didn't think this would be the future. But today we've seen it. So what my advice to people, including my children, is follow your passion. Okay, and you're in university, it would have been nice to advise you before you got into university to know what to study. But if you're already in the university, finish whatever you're studying, but follow your passion. Passion makes a whole lot of difference.
Jeff, what would you say? You have young children. What, are you telling them anything now?
Well, for starters, it may be a less traditional answer, to learn compassion, to learn the meaning of compassion, to learn how to practice compassion. The world needs more compassion as we all retreat increasingly to our in-groups, which is facilitated by digital technologies that make it possible to just self-select the folks that agree with us and the folks that look like us and sound like us. I think compassion can and should be taught in all schools, and that's something I'm very passionate about. I think at primary school level, I think critical reasoning, creative problem solving, collaboration are three fundamental skills that will serve all kids well as they continue to advance in a more global, more digital, more networked society. We talked earlier about the need for digital fluency, just basic digital skills. And then I would add to that the ability to code or understand technology is certainly going to serve people well.
A lot of C's.
It's a lot of C's. Not
Compassion,
by design,
creative
but
problem solving, collaboration.
there's a framework there. So.
How can digital platforms help you with things like compassion, creative problem solving, and collaboration? How can it do that?
Well, the same technology that unfortunately has the unintended consequence of drawing us all closer to people like us also has the potential to help us understand what other people are going through, to walk a mile in their shoes and see the world through their perspective. Just by virtue of sharing our stories and our perspectives, the way you've been doing on LinkedIn. And that is a game changer. And we haven't historically had the ability to do that at this kind of scale. Facilitating the way in which people communicate with one another in an ideal world, facilitating the way in which we have real discourse based on fact and allow for differences of opinions. And these are all things that are possible, and I hope we increasingly find that to be the case.
Can I say
Sure,
something
Tony,
to
go
this?
ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so it's interesting this conversation is coming up at this time because in my quiet time at times, I struggle a bit with what I'm about to say now. So I believe strongly in digital economy, especially for Africa, and I think it's one way we have to leapfrog. But at times I also ask myself as I try to look into the future about issues that are emerging. And so, Jeff, this is your space. Maybe you can help educate us better. So I think now you have consciousness, human consciousness, and human intelligence. Human intelligence, artificial intelligence can address that. People are, that space is quite dispassionate. There's no human feeling. There's no humanity. You have consciousness, which is human, and the humanity in us. So as we embrace the digital technology, digital age, we are decoupling the human consciousness from intelligence. Okay? And the intelligence can be artificial, as we have, but the human consciousness aspect of it is what makes the difference. And talking about compassion. So it's interesting to hear you talk about compassion. You look at today, or soon, the world with IBM Watson, you can actually, you might not.
But there are others, there's Siri, there's others too.
There might be no job for Jimmy again.
Yes.
You have military drones today. And you have now, talking of automated cars that will move. And so in terms of skill development, in terms of the human value, economic value, human military value, is kind of, it seems to me that over time it's going to diminish. So my concern is, what kind of world would we have, say, like in 20, 30 years' time, when we have more of artificial intelligence and a decoupling of the human part of it? How do we deal with that world?
That's a great question. Jeff?
Well, at least for the foreseeable, thanks, Jim, by the way. Tossing that one my way. At least for the foreseeable future, before we live in a world where the computers are programming the computers and creating their own AI code, and that day may be fast approaching. But until that day occurs, we're still living in a world where human beings are responsible for the AI and for the algorithms. And so it's absolutely imperative that those of us responsible for creating the technology are manifesting the right kind of values and the right kind of humanity and the right kind of consciousness, and taking the time to understand the unintended consequences of this technology and these capabilities before they're unleashed. And all too often in the times we live in, people are trying to get these products and services to market as quickly as possible for the sake of competing or growing. And I think we're all now recognizing increasingly that, like everything else in life, there are unintended consequences And so we need to make sure, that's why when we talk about education, I start with compassion. Because if we're teaching our kids today the importance of compassion, those kids are tomorrow's engineers that are creating these technologies, then ideally those algorithms and those software programs, their code is infused with their values.
It's amazing. You know, we're going to talk about all the great things looking forward, and we end up talking about compassion, creative problem solving, collaboration, and conscience. And it's not a surprise to me that you two leaders would bring up those issues. Let me turn a little bit, and Jeff, you know, we're so excited about our collaboration with LinkedIn, and one of the things that that we just started doing is in South Africa, we started looking at the jobs that are in particular cities and the skills that are either entering or leaving, and to try to get a sense of the match. And, and you talked about it earlier. Tell us a little bit about your guys' perspective on this collaboration, because we're over the moon. We're so excited about it. And if we can actually provide a picture of the jobs that are needed, the skills that exist, the skills that are leaving or entering, we could reshape the way young people are moving in a way that would be transformative. So I just want, Jeff, tell us your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't be more excited about the collaboration and the partnership for all the reasons that you were just suggesting. We've got the platform and the infrastructure. We increasingly have the data and these mechanisms through which we can report out on these skills gaps and actually enable and equip and empower individuals, governments, companies to do something about it. And you think about the World Bank's worldview, and the access you have to countries all over the world and their citizens, and your understanding of developing economies and what's increasingly necessary. And we can start to take some of the guesswork out of this process. You have a lot of futurists trying to predict what's happening, but as you and I both know, if you've got the data, you can start to answer those questions in a meaningful way. And the example you cited in South Africa is one of many where we really are in a position to go as deep as we can, depending on the partnership, and understanding exactly what you just exemplified. Where are the fastest growing jobs? Where are the folks graduating? What skills are they graduating with? You can start to trend that out and see potential gaps. You can start to point it out. And one of the things you asked me earlier about the future of universities, I think increasingly universities need to strike stronger relationships and partnerships with both companies, the private sector, and the public sector in terms of local government, to understand where the jobs are going to be and ensure that their curriculums are evolving in such a way where those students are being prepared. You can also see geographic migration patterns, inflows and outflows of talent. And as we both know, if you really want to motivate a leader, whether it's a government leader or a corporate leader, show them how the competition's doing. Show them where that talent, their own people are leaving to go to and why they're going there, and what they can do to retain that talent and where they need to invest.
So we're out of time, but I'm going to give you both a chance for final words. You know, in these rapidly changing times, where we're all worried about whether technology is going to help us leap forward, or technology is going to devastate countries because of no jobs, what message would you leave the entire audience and everyone online? What would you tell them?
So my messages will go to different stakeholders. First, to governments in Africa, policymakers in Africa, to say that we do have what, in my viewpoint, will help us leapfrog the past and into the future in terms of development, and that is the youth of Africa. Over 60% of them are under the age of 30. This could be a huge market. This could be a strong intellectual platform for us as a continent. This is indeed not just human capital, but the continent's capital. Let's prioritize our youth. If we prioritize our youth, they will in turn help to address most of the challenges we have. I speak passionately about this because I interact with the African youth, and I see in them a willingness, a desire, and capability to succeed. What is lacking is what what government policymakers are not able to provide. To fellow private sector leaders in Africa, in the 21st century, we cannot just wait for government alone or our development partners alone to help to fix our problem for us in Africa. We need to mobilize our resources within the continent, bring the resources we have outside to the continent, invest in the continent, consistent with the philosophy of African capitalism, consistent with shared prosperity, so that development on the continent is inclusive and everybody feels and benefits from it. We do have resources. that can help address most of this. The third to our development partners is please continue, first, to engage our policymakers, two, to encourage everyone. Yesterday, I spent time with the CEO of IFC, thinking of how to de-risk opportunities on the continent so that massive inflow can come into the continent. Don't relent. Let's continue to interact together and see how we fix this problem. And to the young Africans, it always seems difficult, but people succeed. I've succeeded on the continent, and you will succeed. We all, private sector leaders, development partners, African government, will come together. We have no option but to support you to succeed, because your success is our collective success. So stay on course, keep the hope alive, and you will succeed.
Great.
Thank you.
Jeff.
In an era where socioeconomic stratification is hovering in certain places around the world in historic highs, it's important to recognize that our capacity to understand some of the trend lines that we've been discussing thus far has never been greater, and we can do something about it. And it's going to require a shared sense of purpose and partnership between the right constituents, the right business leaders, the right government leaders, the right NGO leaders. But if we're all committed to creating economic opportunity for everyone, not just those that live in the most developed markets or economies, we can make a meaningful difference.
Everybody, Tony Elamello, Jeff Weiner, we're so lucky to have them here. Thanks, everybody.
A look at the Rwanda economy. It's one that has continued to shoot the lights out when it comes to economic performance, anything between 6 and 7%. And you're looking to continue to bolster this given the recent reforms that you've also announced. However, when it comes to the digital economy, what kind of role and strategic positioning are you focusing on digital, which will also have significant ripple effects to the overall economic performance of Rwanda?
Thank you very much. I must say that digital economy is playing already a significant role in overall economic performance, and we think that in the future, ICT will play even a bigger role. Today, ICT contribution to our GDP is around 3%, but we think it will grow even faster given our plans that I will highlight shortly. Our Vision 2020 has set a goal of becoming a knowledge-based economy, and ICT development is one of the pillars of that vision. So where are we today? In brief, we have the policy framework in place. I can mention like a broadband policy, cybersecurity policy, data revolution policy, e-waste policy, and many others that guide the development of ICT in Rwanda. We have also strategies such as the Smart Rwanda Master Plan that now is being implemented. We have put in place infrastructure that really support the development of the digital economy, like the national fiber optic network covering the whole territory. We have a national data center. We have e-government portal where about 89 public administration services are offered to citizens online. All kinds of certificates are delivered online, and the related fees are paid also online through mobile phone or other devices. We have introduced the e-procurement. It is operational since last year, July, which is allowing now all bidders from all over the world to compete online without physical contact with our procurement officers, which actually prevent attempts to corruption. And we are also promoting young entrepreneurs. We have incubation centers. We have now established a fund, innovation fund, which require about $100 million, and $30 million are already secured to start.
Indeed. Minister, I'd like to come back to you in just a moment so that we can delve further into some of the insight that you can share with us with regard to how Rwanda has managed to get itself to this particular level. Minister Ekufula, I'd like to come to you briefly and appreciating the fact that you're also an attorney by profession. You understand the regulatory landscape and the pressures that often come with ensuring that there's affordable access to spectrum, that we don't necessarily cultivate a culture where monopolies are the leaders within particular sectors. How is Ghana approaching the dynamics with regard to ensuring that the necessary infrastructure is in place to facilitate the growth of a digital economy in Ghana?
Thank you very much. Without the requisite infrastructure, it is impossible to deliver the services that one needs to deliver to the people. And so in Ghana, we've invested in a fiber optic network around the country. However, there are still significant pockets of the country without access to connectivity. And it is imperative that we work with our universal access service provider in partnership with the private sector to deliver services to the unserved and underserved areas. We cannot develop our country and leave significant portions of the country without access to connectivity. So we've taken a decision to use our universal access fund in partnership with the private sector to deliver the infrastructure that would be open access, and the other telecoms companies can also lease capacity on to deliver services to the people. Now, in addition to that, I think we need to do even more radical things. The costs, the major cost of laying terrestrial fiber is in the excavation. We can't use aerial fiber to deliver access to services quickly to the people around the country. And so we've taken a decision that we will use the fiber over the power lines to deliver access services to telecoms access to people. Now, it is easy to only focus on delivering electricity, but you have this untapped resource which is also available over the power lines. And we think by leveraging that, we can quickly scale up our rate of rollout and make it possible for infrastructure sharing to take place and for the telecoms companies to utilize their resources and their capex on the last mile connectivity, instead of investing significant forms of capital into laying fiber. Now, if you look at the amount of fiber that has been laid by the various telecoms companies around the country, in the areas which are commercially viable,
Sure.
there's a lot of duplication. And I say that if we put it end to end, we could cover the whole country 7 times. But that's not what is happening. And so we need to encourage them not to invest their capex in laying fiber, but to use the existing capacity which already exists and to work in partnership with others so that we can build on the infrastructure that we have. And we think if we do that, we can, within the next 2 years, cover the entire country. And not just the country. If we develop in pockets around the continent, it's not going to deliver the dividends that we know we can and unlock the potential that we have. And so if we all took a policy decision to use our aerial fiber and connect it across borders, we could be having a seamless network of fiber resources from Cape Town to Cairo to Casablanca to Dakar and Accra and everywhere else in between.
Indeed.
And it will reduce the cost of delivering on the essential telecom services that are data and voice telephony that our people require, and hopefully help drive down the cost of accessing telecom services, which is the greatest inhibiting factor towards unleashing the creative potential of our young people.
Indeed, Minister. And of course, two views naturally painting a picture of the different backdrops that we see both in Rwanda and Ghana. Omabola, I'd like to take the advantage of speaking to you, given that naturally you've come from the public sector, having previously served as a Minister of Communications within Nigeria, and now within your capacity as a private sector representative for affordable internet access for all. all, how do you view the conversations that take place at these different spectrums? Where are we falling short in ensuring that there's areas of alliance that we can establish in order to catalyze the development of e-government services as well as tech and digital entrepreneurship across the continent?
Thank you. I mean, I think that when you speak to ministers of ICT in any of the emerging economies, they say exactly what the Honourable Minister said around, make sure there's connectivity in the rural areas where the economic activity is not seen to be so great. And how do you do that? I think what we're finding at the Alliance for Affordable Internet is that it's a combination of things. It's first of all having what we call more innovative financing. And so having a hybrid of, or a blend of both private capital, capital that comes from the countries, and also multilateral development capital, and using this in ways that actually enable us to deploy that capital in a much more sensible manner. The second thing that we look at is financing innovative models, and that's a little bit different, where we see there are lots of entrepreneurs across the continent that are thinking through different ways of getting connectivity to these rural areas, and it's sometimes overlaid on existing infrastructure. It's sometimes based on building and designing new infrastructure in cheaper ways. And using white space technology, just lots of innovation around bringing this connectivity to the rural areas. And so we need to think, these are models that haven't scaled anywhere in the world. And that's because they don't get the appropriate attention and appropriate financing. So looking at those innovative models and trying to finance them, getting brands to pay for it. Every time you get in a rural area, you get connectivity, you have to watch an advert or something like that. So financing it in a more innovative manner. You asked about entrepreneurship, and that's really, when we talk about digital entrepreneurship, the bedrock of it is connectivity. Because what the digital economy does is that it gives you an addressable market that is several millions instead of just the people around your vicinity. And there needs to be a way to, I mean, we can talk about this later. Let me just answer the question that you've asked me. So I think it's really around innovative financing and the finance of innovative models.
Mm-hmm. I want to stay with you briefly as just to build up on the innovative financing. What we've certainly seen is that there's quite a strong level of support, not only from governments, but of course from DFIs who've come certainly across the African continent and found various opportunities to invest in, such as Bilha's organization. And perhaps starting with you, as we make our way to Bilha. Naturally, for various stakeholders, there are different interests when it comes to financing. For a private sector investor, it's to make a significant return. For government, perhaps it is a grant which is provided to that particular institution. How do we make sure that with regard to putting together these innovative financing policies, we address the needs of the various stakeholders, whilst, of course, ensuring significant reward and mitigating as much risk as possible?
It's a bit difficult to hear you, but I'll try and answer. The question around innovative financing. I think one thing that I failed to mention was that because the ICT sector has been seen very much as a sector that is driven by private capital, I think we've seen very little of the other types of capital coming in here, and really the outcome of that is what we see today, where many parts of the continent really don't have that infrastructure because they're not seen as commercially viable. I think around that innovative finance, I go back to this notion of trying to get a blend of both grants, private capital that comes from the country itself. And sometimes when we talk about grants, when we look at some of these developing economies, when we raise capital for infrastructure, we tend not to look at ICT infrastructure at all. And again, recent research has shown that when you look at the MDBs, the multilateral development banks, and what they have put into infrastructure, I think it's about 500 billion over the last 4 years or so. Only 1% of that is in ICT infrastructure. And that's a challenge because everywhere we go right now, we're talking about a digital economy. So it's a case of really beginning to put our money where our mouths are. So there's a lot of narrative around digital economy. We need to figure out a way, how do we get that narrative across that? Yes, this is it's private sector driven, private capital driven, but for us to get the true benefits of this digital economy, the multilateral development banks, the DFIs need to examine how they are spending money on ICT infrastructures, because that digital economy will not happen until we bring in many more of these people that are excluded. And the way that we do that is to finance infrastructure in those rural areas. And the way that we do that is to get a better representation of the DFI and the grant money, together with having incentives that will attract more private capital in at lower returns, because sometimes these are lower returns. And then finally, I think the countries also need to step up to the plate and also use some of the funds that they have from taxes to put more money into ICT infrastructure, regardless of how much private capital is coming in there.
Indeed. Well, let's speak to one of those beneficiaries and companies as well that's leading the charge. And Bilha, that leads me to come to you. You lead a pan-African institution with regard to mobile technology and a presence in more than 7 countries across the African continent. And you've also mastered the ever-tricky environment regarding regional integration with regard to this particular development. You've also received $6 million US from the IFC, and certainly this has enabled the growth projections that you have for your entity. Picking up on some of the themes that have been addressed by Omobola with regard to the innovative financing solutions and, of course, addressing the needs of various stakeholders adequately. How is Africa Talking viewing the dynamics with regard to innovative financing and building and scaling up on the participation in the digital economy across the continent?
Okay. Thanks very much. So just given what we're doing as Africa is Talking, so just a brief background, what we try and do is sort of building up into what they're saying about access to infrastructure is important. And we figured out that if we're going to build a digital economy, you do need the software developers who actually do build this digital infrastructure that we're talking about. We need to give them access to the very critical infrastructure. That could be banks, that could be telcos, because they need to communicate, they need to get paid. And typically the people that own this infrastructure tends to be very traditional sort of types of industries, and they don't quite understand why should I get this developer or this software developer access to my infrastructure? But they need that infrastructure. And then that's just within one country. And then when you start thinking about East Africa, I mean, we are currently in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, and recently gone into Nigeria and starting to look into Malawi.
You've ticked all the boxes on our panel except for
Yes.
Ghana just yet.
Yes, I will be talking to the minister right after this and seeing how we can get into Ghana. But it's interesting because we see people with really innovative ideas. So for example, someone is running a company where they are getting, providing solar panels at, on a daily, on credit. They start out in Kenya, very, very successful, but then the minute they have to cross over to Uganda, it's a very different regulatory regime, and then infrastructure access is completely, it's very different. And so for us, and just going back to your question around innovative financing and why DFI and that kind of capital is important, is because it does understand these challenges, and it does understand what it means to finance infrastructure across Africa. And so I think leaning back to the previous conversation that just happened, previous infrastructure, people have thought about infrastructure in terms of railway and roads. But if we're going to be building a digital economy, we kind of need to start pushing the thinking into what is digital infrastructure and how do we begin to finance that? And in a lot of ways, that requires a little bit more patient capital, which typical private financing might not be able to give. But government financing or DFI type of financing could sort of provide that linkage between it's private, yes, it's looking for a return on investment, but then it's a bit more patient and is willing to go into some of these more riskier markets, so to speak. Yes.
Indeed. Shani, I'd like to come to you as well to get your view as a fellow entrepreneur who's also changing the landscape with regard to skills development when it comes to building this digital economy. Like your colleagues and peers on the panel, you've also managed to receive some significant funding and are really taking a full advantage of the level of participation that you have with your government in Nigeria. Just a few days ago, earlier this week, if I'm not mistaken, you hosted the Vice President of Nigeria as well as the Minister of Communications to your offices. Is this perhaps an illustration of the level of communication and access with regard to collaborative efforts that you have with Nigeria's government?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Fellow panelists, I think this topic is obviously one that we all take very seriously and is one that we should be addressing. So I'm honored to be on stage here. I think they say pictures are worth 1,000 words. They're also sometimes very misleading. And I think what I would say, to that particular image is we don't actually do very much with the government in Nigeria. We have worked with governments in other countries as well. I think primarily around how we move into those countries and making sure that we can set up shop and establish a presence that's sort of fulfilling. We have worked with DFIs. I mean, the IFC is one of our backers. And so I think we spent probably more time with sort of private organizations or private-esque organizations than we do with governments. For context, what Andela is trying to do, and just to spend a minute on that, is we all talk about the future of technology. And for me, and I think for my colleagues at Andela, we have an existential crisis, which is we've missed two major global revolutions, the agricultural revolution and industrial revolution. And it's easy to leapfrog some of those. You can sort of start planting today if you wanted to. You can import a lot of infrastructure for even the power sector. Technology and software is very, very hard to catch up with. And if we get left behind this time, we have a deep fear that Africa will become, if not extinct, will probably end up with a recolonization. And so this is not a topic of sort of, we're happy to be here and build these things. It is more like, if I want my children and grandchildren to live in a world where opportunity is equal for them,
Indeed.
we have to play in the digital space, and we have to work with the rest of the world to build the future technologies that we want to see. So I'll pause for a second, just in case you want to follow up.
I actually want to jump in there because you mentioned something so critical. If this conversation affects everybody in the room and we all have a critical interest in ensuring that future generations will be active participants in the digital economy, we all have a vested interest here. What you mentioned about the limited interaction that you've had with government ministers and, of course, representatives of the public sector is also quite important. What is it that you, as an entrepreneur, as a private sector participant, would actually like from government in order to create this enabling environment, not only for you in Nigeria, but across the continent? And following up on that, I'm hoping that we can get, perhaps Minister Ndagijimana, we can come to you to get your perspective on this and providing some feedback too.
That's a fantastic question. And I'm glad we have some ministers here. So, what we need is two things. There is the part of it that is what they should keep doing from a government perspective, and there's a part of it that is what they probably should stop doing. The keep doing is, keep staying out of the way of entrepreneurs and technology innovators. One of the reasons why we're very lucky is in most sectors across Africa that can be regulated, have been regulated. And a lot of times what that does is it makes companies in Africa many times uncompetitive versus their counterparts elsewhere. I think with skills like software development, it is very hard to put a finger on it. You can't quantify it. You can't hold on to it. So how do you regulate it? You can't really. So what we've actually been able to do is benefit from the fact that no one in the government can really stop us from writing code. And as a result, we can really just innovate and accelerate. So I think very much more of deregulate, move out of the way, and the government should play a role of sort of like the companies that clear the snow during the winter, right? Cars are driving, they're clearing all the snow, and the cars can move freely on the highway. So I think keep doing more of that. That's great. And in many countries, both in Ghana and Rwanda, we've seen people that are interested in helping with that. I think in terms of what should stop or maybe start doing a bit more of is, at the end of the day, every organization, every private entity is fueled by the demand for their services and the ability to capture that demand and monetize that demand. And then on the other side, the ability to hire people, some of the smartest people they can find, and create an ecosystem for those people to thrive so they can show up to work every day, whether it's online or in person, and do their work. Literally, that is every business in the world. It's a two-sided marketplace of talent coming in, creating, and then selling.
Sure.
And so when governments can focus on building the infrastructure that allows all these people to live in peace, in security, with infrastructure, with power, with access to all the resources they need, with transportation to get to work, real estate, housing, access to loans, then you can have people focused on adding value every day.
Exactly.
And I think that's really what we need in this space to succeed.
Ministers, I'd like a brief response from the both of you. You've heard it from the entrepreneurs themselves, perhaps a little bit more clarity on clearing the way, quite literally. Minister Ndagijimana, I'd like to come to you because naturally you participated in these kind of conversations, not only in ensuring that Rwanda plays a key role in the digital economy for your particular nation, but from a regional point of view as well. How do we incorporate these conversations and themes not only to individual states, but also ensuring that they translate to a regional conversation, ensuring that we expedite the process of the development of a digital economy?
I think the government response to the needs of our young entrepreneurs is positive. We see a lot of progress in the different countries. Infrastructure, as he requests, but infrastructure is not enough. We have also to invest in skills. So education is very critical. And I think many countries are making a lot of effort in that area. But we need to think of really creating a comprehensive, a complete ecosystem that combine education, infrastructure, financing, and all regulatory
How has Rwanda done
framework.
that correctly to get the buy-in of fellow ministries as well as members of the private sector?
Yes,
We're looking for practical examples to implement in other states.
I think I mentioned the infrastructure. I think we are doing well with infrastructure. We policy the regulations, but specifically we are investing more in education, and a lot of young people are developing talents. We have established incubation centers where young people who have shown interest and talent are being coached to develop their solutions. And now we are creating a special fund, that I mentioned, to support the startups in the area of ICT. We are putting together a fund of $100 million, and $30 million are already available. Mm-hmm. We have just signed an agreement with the African Development Bank alone, and we are mobilizing the rest from the private sector. So, and another thing, we have created now what we call Kigali Innovation City, which is a special zone where we are putting all infrastructure, attracting centers of excellence. We have now completed the construction of the campus of the Carnegie Mellon University, which is offering a high quality education in the ICT and the other technologies. About 100 students have already graduated. And we're attracting more innovators, more investment in the different areas in one place to ensure synergies. So we think this is some of the initiatives that we have taken. Thank you. And I invite him to join.
At least a hand of cooperation that certainly is taking place within Rwanda. Minister Kufula, I'd also like to come to you to get some feedback with regard to conversations that entrepreneurs would like to hear from governments. But most importantly, we've naturally heard the theme with regard to these software developers who are coming up and about, but also taking into appreciation the fact that there are still significant sectors that the African continent can capitalize on, such as agriculture, perhaps manufacturing still, where certain economies continue to be significant performers there. Are you in agreement with the sentiment that these software skills, if deployed within these traditionalist economies, can really help to fast-track the development of African economies? And is that taking place in Ghana specifically?
Absolutely. We can't talk about the digital economy in isolation. And providing the infrastructure alone is not enough. It is the applications which impact the lives of the people which make that investment meaningful. And so it's important that governments also, in answering my colleagues' concerns here, also use their purchasing power to encourage the entrepreneurial and innovative skills that are inherent in our young people. In Ghana, we've done that in a small way. Our National ID project, which is taking off this month, is being powered by applications developed locally. And in the same way, our digital property addressing system was also done by local young people who have demonstrated their ability to produce and develop world-class applications and software. So in having this conversation as well, I think our development partners sometimes also have to relax the rules a bit and let there be some form of positive discrimination in favor of local expertise. Mm-hmm. It is all well and good to have international competitive bidding, but we cannot compete in that space. So if we really want to encourage the entrepreneurship and the skills of our young people, we need to look at having some sort of a closed procurement system which will enable young people, entrepreneurs, innovators, also be able to showcase what they've been able to do. Because if they're given the opportunity, they can also have world-class applications, and we can use our own purchasing power to also encourage and grow that space as well. We've seen a lot of innovative applications enhancing agriculture around the country, giving them real-time weather forecasting information, giving them information about even when to plant where to plant and how to plant, which is also increasing yields across the country. We have seen it happening in the field of education. We have seen it happening in health. And it can happen across sectors. Those are the actions that impact the lives of people that make this whole conversation meaningful to them. Otherwise, it becomes an academic exercise, and we're talking to ourselves. And the innovators are creating, the techies are creating applications that they're quite happy with, but that are of really not much relevance to the people. But those are the things that we need to do to give meaning to this whole exercise. And I believe if we all combined our efforts in this area, we would see Africa leapfrogging development using the tech skills and the digital skills that we also need to teach our people to acquire.
Indeed. In a minute, we will be taking a few questions from some of the institutions who are participating online, as well as from you as audience members who have been tweeting. However, I do want us to reflect on the skills, because there is a significant level of camaraderie that has taken place between members who are on my panel. Perhaps if you were privy to the background conversations, you would have seen just how interactive and engaging the panelists were with regard to their efforts in really upskilling many Africans on the continent. We also heard from the fire starter conversation. Compassion, making sure that you find the right educational institutions or looking for alternatives to ensure that these digital skills are actually passed on. Sheni and Bila, this is clearly where your expertise certainly lie. I'd like to start off with you, Sheni, where you can provide us with some context for the individuals who are watching, for the students who are in research and universities across the African continent. What is it that they need to be empowering and developing within themselves to make sure that they are relevant within the digital economy of the continent? And most importantly, how to make sure that they don't restrict their skills only to the private sector or working for other larger organizations, but coming back and paying it forward within the economies that they represent. Let's start with you.
Thank you. So we've actually looked at all the different things you could possibly do to invest in yourself, and we've taken those and filtered them into sort of our core values as an organization. And so rather than spit off a series of things that may be incoherent, I think I'll speak to how we project our beliefs onto the world. We have a 4-letter acronym called EPIC, and those are our corporate values. It's excellence, passion, integrity, collaboration. We deeply believe that if people exhibit and truly imbibe those 4 values, they create a lot of good in the world. So excellence simply meaning focusing on being the best possible self you can be and giving your all, always. And I think it covers things that Mr. Lumenlu talked about, and both Jeff as well, things around problem solving, creativity and all those. I think those tap very closely into excellence. Passion is focused on waking up every day and feeling like you want to contribute to the world and finding that inner purpose that sort of propels you to go and do that thing every single day. And we think people will go through all sorts of challenges based on passion, and so that's one that we feel is very, very core as well. The third is integrity. Integrity is one that I think across the world is a big problem today, and I think particularly with leadership, we're trying to build not just software developers who can build technology, but people that are going to be leaders who will build things with the right virtues and the right values. And so when no one's looking, what are you going to do? And so we preach about integrity, we screen for integrity, and throughout the lifeline of when someone's employed at Andela, it's a thing we focus on all the time. And the last is collaboration. So I think we're seeing themes here around some of the same words. But collaboration really just simply means, for us, 1 + 1 = 3. And we deeply believe that for Africa to move into that future space we all expect it to move into, we have to collaborate very deeply with everyone else in the world. And I sometimes I hear very nationalistic or sort of continental sentiments that say this has to be built in Africa, made by Africans, just by Africans, for Africans. I think that's a huge fallacy. I don't think I can think of a single country that has closed its borders, self-invested, and developed and accelerated its journey out of whatever situation it's in. So for us, collaboration is something we do internally. It is what we do with our partners, what we do with our customers, and it's what we want to do with the entire world. And so those are the 4 letters I think that I would ask all the folks sitting in many of the universities listening to us to focus on. And then there are probably 1,000 other things you could do, but those are the 4 that I feel strongly about.
epic, and also speaks to how the language that is often used by young millennials leading that way. Bill, I'd also like to get your perspective on this with regard to ensuring that we cultivate the right skills and, of course, perhaps share them both in the public and the private sector, as we've even witnessed with Omobola, with her experience in both particular realms.
Okay. I think I would take it back a little bit differently. So when you think about talent, I mean, people keep saying talent is a problem in Africa. But again, we do have a really young population and some of the brightest people we've seen. And so, for example, in my company, we've so both myself and my co-founder are both US trained, but everyone else that we've hired has actually been trained in African schools. And so we definitely believe that you can find good and very brilliant engineers and software developers on the continent. However, and I think I'm really excited about what Ghana is doing, what we find is that people are very smart and they're probably trained, but then they never get exposure to building world-class technology or building applications that are used at scale. So maybe they will learn how to build an application and they will build it, but it's only used by 5, 10 people. And the only places where they would actually be able to find or get exposure to build stuff at scale is when they actually get exposed to either working with governments or with bigger multinationals. And what tends to happen a lot of times is when you look at where the multinationals or the governments get their contracts or give their contracts to, it tends to be to international companies. I have no problem with that because if you need the job done, you need to get the job done. But I really would request and sort of behoove everyone that has power to do so, begin to give some opportunities to the software developers on the continent. Of course, there has to be mentorship, it has to be deliberate. If you need to pair them with international companies, whatever needs to be done, I think let's definitely have conversations. It's not an either or. We can't just say we're going to be very nationalistic. But at the same time, the talent will never get developed if they don't get exposure to these kinds of world-scale problems or those kinds of issues. So, and I mean, I've spoken to some of the companies that are a bit more successful, and usually they will tell you it's the day we got a contract with the government that things shifted for us. Or it's a day this telco came on board and said, come and do this for us. And all of a sudden, they moved from being a startup to a proper enterprise that's actually hiring a lot more people. And the thing is, what we've recognized is also that if you train software developers and give them the skills that we're talking about, you solve one level of talent. But then once they get exposure, either working at bigger companies or solving these bigger problems, they're then able to see, oh, it's actually possible to solve this problem. So they might stay with a company or they might leave and then now begin to do some of the interesting things such as building agricultural applications or those kinds of applications. But they need to see that. They need to see it. If people don't see it, they kind of keep thinking, oh, we can't quite do this. But the minute they see problems solved at a certain level, they're sort of like, okay, maybe I can step back and I'll solve a problem I saw in my village or I saw in my country.
Exactly. And that speaks to something quite critical, which we need to ensure we communicate back to the entrepreneurs as well as policymakers across the continent, is that we certainly need to be globally competitive, but locally relevant, ensuring that we address the needs that are on the continent. And I want to close with you, Omobola, to get your closing comments on the various cogs of the wheel. We certainly take a look at the infrastructure, which needs to speak to developing the necessary skills, ensuring that the necessary digital platforms are there to financial inclusion and, of course, entrepreneurship. But unless we constantly evolve, constantly develop all these various elements, the wheel at some point will stop turning. What are the critical elements that we need to bear in mind to ensure that during all these various stages, taking into account the various stakeholder needs, that we are building a sustainable digital economy here for the future?
Thank you, Gugu. I think the one thing I'd like to mention is capital, and I think it's absolutely important because we can have all these, we can have the connectivity, we can have the entrepreneurs, building these great businesses, but if we don't have the capital to fuel the growth of those businesses, we really are, it's going to be dead in the water. And I think that's very important because when you look at the capital that is coming into the African continent, particularly to support startups, I think it was about $200 million in 2017. It's not enough. It's not enough. There's a lot, because to get to the point where we need to fund hundreds of thousands of companies doing things like Andela, like Africa's Talking, and many of the things that are happening around the continent. And I think that unless we get that capital, the growth capital that's going to enable them to move out of those incubators or safe spaces into the real world, into beginning to build, world-class companies that have their antecedents in the African continent, I think the key ingredient that is required that hasn't been mentioned yet is capital. And I say this from a point of view, yes, I was introduced as the honorary chairperson of the Alliance for Affordable Internet, but I'm also a senior partner in a VC firm. we have, it's taken us many years to raise $40 million to deploy in the African continent. And this is what happens with many of the entrepreneurs. They spend a lot of time trying to raise the capital because they're trying to tell a story of the business they're building, but they're also trying to tell a story of actually this business is in Africa. And for many people that are going to give them money, Africa and technology just don't go together. So, what story are you telling? Are you telling a story about African development, or are you telling a story about technology? So I think that's the key thing. And there's a role that MDBs can play here, either from a point of catalytic role of investing or deploying their capital to support some of these companies. I know IFC is invested in Africa's Token, and I think also in Andela, and that's absolutely fantastic. But I think the role that they can also play is to support the narrative. There is an emerging class of African entrepreneurs that are building great businesses that are scalable and are scaling and are commercially viable. And the voice that multilateral development banks have is the voice that travels all over the world and has a lot of credibility to it. And so helping us to tell that story of emerging entrepreneurship in Africa that will then be supported by capital that comes from all over the globe is actually very important.
Indeed, critical elements, but cash continues to remain king. So unless we open up our pockets and are quite liberal with the information that we're sharing, of course, that will be a slow progress and transformation taking place. Ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time, a big thank you to each and every one of my panelists for having joined us today as we engaged in the conversation on digital economy in Africa. Please give them a round of applause. We will remain seated very briefly. To help wrap up today's session, ladies and gentlemen, please warmly welcome on stage the Chief Executive Officer of the IFC, Philippe Holeroux, who will give us a closing remarks. Thereafter, we will all make our way out of the particular plenary area. A warm round of applause as we welcome him to the podium, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, and many thanks for joining us today. And many thanks to this great panel. I really enjoyed, and I think I tried to soak every word. But summarizing this discussion is not the easy thing to do. I tried to prepare, but I'll try to adjust the thing I wanted to do. And you did a great job, so it makes my life even more complicated. So, but seriously, what I heard first is, which was a bit surprising to me, because I thought we were going straight into technology, but we talk a lot of talks on values. And what do I ask my kids to study, or what do I tell my kids to study? And I learned a lot about passion, compassion, collaboration. These are, if this is indeed the case, and I believe I buy it, by the way, then I will tell my kids, start with studying philosophy before coding. That's my view, but it's totally personal. But that I took away, and that's really, we opened like this, and you came back to it, and it came back in the discussion. So the second point for me is very fundamental also, that I heard is that the path to economic development is changing, and changing fast. And the development model that I grew up with was, like Jim said, you go for low productivity agriculture to light manufacturing, heavy manufacturing, services, and in fact, there's some countries that did extremely well, including a very big one, and it was a huge success. Now the question is that the model going forward? And I heard a lot of doubts about it. But what is a bit disturbing is I heard the doubts that it may not be replicatable. And I read in the newspaper that Levi's, for example, has found a new technology on stitching their jeans, and they're repatriating all their operation in the United States, which means destroying jobs in Sri Lanka and other places. So, but what is the new model? And what I heard is, we don't know. That's the truth. We don't know the new model. So we're very comfortable because it was tested for 70 years. The new model, we don't know. But we know that we have to build the digital economy, because if you miss it, then you may miss the opportunities of the next model that we don't know. But you know that you have to do that to make sure that you don't miss out on these promises. But I believe I'm an optimist, so challenges, yes, but opportunities, but we don't know. So it's a bit, so the sure bet is, and what I heard, is let's build the digital economy, let's start with the basics. And that's electricity. It's very hard to hook a computer if you don't have the electricity. I mean, that's simple. So electricity, broadband, we need to make a big headway in broadband in Africa. Regulations, you talked about monopoly, I completely agree. And regulation is more than that, but you want to kind of make sure that the policy is an enabler rather than an impediment or a roadblock for entrepreneurs that will come with these new ideas. So that was very loud and clear. We don't know the model, but we know what to do to make sure that whatever model happens, it has the maximum chance of success. So that is a sure bet, I think. And we are, because in the end, I mean, if countries fail, they will fall behind. And I think that was very eloquent what panelist Suleiman said. I think it's very true. And then the danger, the stakes are high. Because I don't think that you can afford to say, oh, we'll wait and we'll see and how the new model will evolve, then we'll join the gang. No, you may fall behind and it may be much harder to catch up. So that is a very important point. So we have to do it. Then another point that I took is that, frankly, and it was done in a very nice way by the entrepreneur, so let me kind of lay one more layer, a thick layer on the private sector. Now we see truly innovative companies and business model that emerge from developing market. And this is extremely powerful, and they become world-class companies. So let me give you a couple of quick examples. I don't want to bore you too much, but it's powerful. Now we have tens of millions of individuals who have never set foot in a bank, now have access to finance and financial services through internet-based lending platform. And one in Africa, like M-Pesa, but there are others, and financial in East Asia, very powerful and growing. This is amazing. This is financial inclusion. This is very important. This is critical. And then we have new business models like distributed generation that are bringing renewable off-grid electricity to rural Africa for the first time. And it's viable commercially. So this is a leapfrogging of the traditional power grid type development that we've seen for the last decades. So that's powerful. And the third point is the digital divide we see now. It's both within and between countries. It's not only these countries, these other countries. It's both inside and vis-à-vis the neighborhood or the rest of the world. So we see now this divide is, what the statistic I have is 60% of the world people are offline and do not have any internet access. Nearly 2 billion do not use a mobile phone, and almost 500 million live outside areas with a mobile signal. These are hard data. And most of the people that are offline are in Africa. In fact, 21 of the 25 least connected countries are in Africa. So clearly, we need to step up the building of digital economy in Africa. It's straightforward, but it needs to be repeated and loudly. As we heard today in this panel, for us to do this, we must work together, and we heard it again and again, between government, private sector, NGOs, and the broader development community. I loved, in fact, the repeated mention about entrepreneurship. I think this is a new Africa. We need to nurture this entrepreneur. We need to create the incubators. We need to come with a VC that is needed. I've seen it. I've seen a huge amount of talent. I know Tony from some time now, and I want to salute him and what he's doing with his foundation. But we need more. We need hundreds of those. And we're working with our colleagues across the street in the World Bank. I mean, I'm in IFC, but we're working with IFC to make sure that we develop these and hook it to other incubators across the world, from Canada to Europe to the US to Lebanon to Dubai. I mean, I think that there is a lot more we can do, and there is this hunger that is coming now. So a lot of young people in Africa, and that's my personal view. The previous model was, okay, let's study hard and let's go to a big enterprise or to the government. Now I see more and more this appetite to try to do something. And that I think is powerful. I think the talent is there. The energy is humongous. We talked about the dividend, the demographic dividend. I think this is one way to translate it into a dividend. So let me now say a word on IFC. In IFC, we have adopted a new strategy. We call it IFC 3.0, again, the wink to the ICT. But the fundamental is very simple. You can grasp the thing is just create markets. Don't wait for market to be created and then we finance an opportunity here and there. Just lean forward, be more proactive. Let's create these markets and we can do it. And we can do it by a mix of things. We talked about the role of government. Change or get out of the way, or change the regulations, clean the books, maybe change the books. So that's one thing. And so we need to work upstream to create the condition for a market to prosper, for an entrepreneur to prosper. So that's a new philosophy and strategy that we adopted. I liked very much the comment on innovative financing. I think this is very true, and I do believe on the power of finance, otherwise I will not be where I am, to transform things in the real world. And innovative financing is very promising. In fact, in IFC, we led the MDB, all the heads of MDBs, and into the principles for blended finance. This is potentially very powerful, but we have to be careful. We don't want that to be a race to the bottom to more concessionality, because then you don't make the point that was made, that you have to prove that this is also commercially viable. So if you are on life support all the time, you have not made that proof. So the blended finance, very powerful tool, but like everything that is powerful can be dangerous if not used well. We believe in it. We put the principles. Now the MDBs have accepted it. Now we are implementing it. We have new tools that we are developing. I don't want to bore you with all of them, but I think this is a space where we in IFC, with the World Bank and other MDB, we can help. So now we are implementing this IFC 3.0. And to be honest, I think that this building the digital economy in Africa, it's an example, is a great test case for us, for creating markets, because this is really a huge potential. That's my view. So I think that, to be honest, it's not a choice. We have to do it. I think we can do it, and we will do it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, to the CEO, Mr. Lehoru, and of course a big thank you to my panelists. A quick update for those of you who will be participating in the closed roundtable. It is starting promptly at 12:30 upstairs on the 13th floor. Once more, big thank you for each and every one of you for joining us, and to my panelists once more. Thank you.